established it would thrive for many years. Rather than exporting local timber, the Weiss-Patterson Lumber Company on Bayou Chico imported exotic woods such as mahogany, cypress, and milled it for local markets. On Monday, October 9th, 1933, fire swept the mill, causing over $1,200,000 in damage. The fire, which started at 9:10 in the morning, destroyed over 15 million feet of cypress and mahogany, 30 dwellings, 2 garages, and a store. This lucrative business operation would not be curtailed by something like this, and the mill was rebuilt bigger and better than before. As the pine forests were eliminated and the sawmills closed, turpentine distilleries grew to take their place, and they were scattered all over the region. Extracting the byproducts from the remaining pine stumps, these plants provided employment for many of the displaced mill workers, but they brought their own hazards. In Bromley, Alabama, which is over in next county over there, a young man was killed when he fell into a boiling vat of rosin, and fire remained a real danger. On March 23, 1939, fire struck the Southern Pine Extract Company just south of Milton. 25,000 gallons of tar oil in drums and barrels were soon involved, and the fire threatened to burn several fully loaded railroad tank cars on the siding. These were saved only through the bravery of an engine crew that pushed the cars through the fire to safety. Damages were estimated at $15,000, but given the high demand for tar oil and 30 or so jobs relying on the operation, the plant was quickly rebuilt and back in operation within weeks. On September 21st, 1939, fire devastated one of the largest milling operations in the area, the Alger Sullivan Mill in Century, with an estimated loss of $150,000. In addition to the mill itself, a drugstore, barbershop, doctor's office, and ice plant were also burned. As was so often the case, the mill was quickly rebuilt and back in operation within only days. Built in the late 1940s as the Florida Pulp and Paper Company and later acquired by the St. Regis Paper Company, the large cantonment mill brought new life to the timber industries in northwest Florida. On the afternoon of Friday, March 9th, 1962, a fire was started by a welder's torch that soon spread to involve the entire paper warehouse where craft paper for paper bags was handled. Departments from all over the two-county area responded to help fight this huge fire. Once it was over, one person had died from burns and several others were hospitalized, and the fire had cost more than $3 million and destroyed 8,000 tons of craft shopping paper bags. And I'll be happy to take any questions. I'm always looking for any information, especially photographs, that anybody may have on these or any other fires in the region, because I'm still compiling data, and I hope at some point to publish a book on fires in northwest Florida. Yes, ma'am.
On that one that was Newport, was that, I can't think of the name now, it's in Pensacola, was it on Garden Street?
Barrancas.
It was out Newport. There on Pace Boulevard area, now south of, was it Navy?
Yeah.
They call it Armstrong now, don't they?
I think so. It's in that area.
Yeah, I've been to it.
There was Arizona Chemical, and all of those were later rebuilt in that same area.
Yeah.
There's a lot of major industrial area down there.
Had a lot of stumps piled up there all the time.
Huh?
Remember all the stump piles that were there? There used to be. When you go that way, there'd be just mountains of stumps.
Yeah.
Pine
They
stumps.
did it one time, I think.
Well, all I remember is I was born in 1940.
I remember that.
And we lived on A Street till I was about 12. And my grandmother, that corner, I thought it was Newport News or whatever, but that plant or whatever was there, she put a fear in me about it that it could blow up or explode.
Because it had.
And so I'm wondering if that's why it was.
Yeah, that was a serious explosion. It caused tremendous damage in the area.
Newport Court, I believe, or something like that they call it.
Pardon?
At one time.
Newport Court.
May have.
It's had several names.
Yeah.
Did they do like creosote poles or stuff like that?
I don't know that Newport did then. They were predominantly at that point. That was what that explosion occurred in '26. At the time, they were a Newport Tar and Turpentine company, and it was predominantly just tar and turpentine. Now, as time went by, mineral spirits came in. That they changed, and turpentine and the pine products and all of that were not nearly as important. So they very well may have switched over to other products. But then, the timber industry had just cut over this whole county, and the agricultural industry followed behind. But before agricultural really followed behind, you had the tar and turpentine industry, because they found a use for those stumps. But what they'd often do, they go out and they try to pull the stumps, but those old heart pine stumps, that root system, they didn't rot. They stayed there in the ground.
See what they did? They
dynamite.
Dynamite.
Yeah.
Because my dad used to do it.
Yeah.
They dynamite them, and they said they shipped them to Newport.
Because they'd go out and try to pull them, but they couldn't pull them. And so they just get in there, they dig down under the main body there by that taproot, and they put a stick or two of dynamite in there and blow it out of the ground, and then haul it down to Newport.
We have some of those drills over there. They would drill a hole in there, those little augers. And
When
put-
Daddy died, we still had dynamite in that garage over there.
Exactly.
That's how your dad got started in this county,
Yeah.
wasn't he? He came in here to blow up stumps.
So that's how he made his living.
Some of Johnny's prior employees used to tell me stories about him sending them over there to work, and that turpentine, once it gets chilled or cools down, it sets up in that line like concrete. They have to go over and change out lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said you can forget it once it gets cold.
Yeah, so I mean, you didn't shut that operation down, you kept that going. So,
Go back to the Milton Courthouse Fire, 1869, roughly. I remember seeing old Western movies and things like that where something would happen to a courthouse, and it was, all you had to do was go claim the land, it was yours. Surely it didn't happen like that, did it? I mean, if the courthouse burned, and if Marshall Diamond here had a field, I mean, it was still his field. I couldn't go take it away from him. could I?
no, but, and it's interesting that it occurred when it did, because if you think about it, you had the war,
Right.
and then you had the Reconstruction period, and Pensacola and Milton were both provost stations and were garrisoned by Union troops all through the Reconstruction period. So basically, the Southerners were totally disenfranchised, had no voting rights, didn't run their own government, and they were just doing the best they could to eat by. And it was 69, 70 in that area where Reconstruction was ending, and they were, Florida was starting to start up on its own local home rule. Well, that's when, everybody's now coming back and trying to assert their property rights and all. There were several areas where courthouses burned in that general time frame, because if there were records disputes, it was a whole lot easier to argue your case if somebody didn't have documentation to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And so there were courthouses throughout the South that were destroyed, because there was so much turmoil during that period. There were, property records and tax responsibilities, taxes that hadn't been paid throughout the war, and all kinds of other issues that came up. And if the records went away, it was a whole lot easier when you were sitting on that property to prove your ownership or argue your ownership, because nobody could prove otherwise had they bought the land during the war or had it changed hands or things like that. So a lot of those courthouse fires that occurred in that window right after the Civil War are suspicious. The interesting thing about that is, we don't have Sanborn maps, we don't have any maps or any real clear description of what Milton was like prior to that period. But when that fire occurred, do you know where the old Berry Hill School is in Milton? Right on Berry Hill Street, right basically where Alabama Street comes down, in the red brick school. Well, that's where the courthouse was. And when that courthouse burned in 1869, and it was a wooden building, and it wasn't a great big building, But when that burned in 1869, the newspaper in Pensacola said that the flames could be seen from Pensacola that night in Milton. So it tells you how massive that fire was. There were several businesses, including stores and attorneys' offices and all, that were impacted or destroyed as a result of that fire in the courthouse. It started in the sheriff's office, but it spread. But what that's telling me is that probably was the business center of Milton. You had some docks and wharfs and industrial stuff down there on the river, but the business center was actually up there on Berry Hill Street. And now what's left, there are some old buildings that go back pretty well to that period that survived the war, but that immediate area has all been rebuilt after the fact. Now, years later, they built the Santa Rosa Academy, which was the graded school in Milton. They built that there on that same site, and it burned down in 1914. Then it sat vacant for a while, and then, because they built the new school down there on Canal Street, which is now the school board office, and then when they kind of outgrew that, they needed an elementary school. They went back to the same site again and built the Berry Hill School there. So that site's had a lot of history to it. But it seems like that was actually kind of the center of downtown Milton before 1869 when it all burned down, and they moved the courthouse down toward the river and built down there.
But you said that the steam firewood sawmills came about in the 1850s.
Yeah, early 1850s.
Okay, now, see, we had steam locomotives back 1825, didn't we? Wasn't that about right on those?
Yeah, I don't know if...
What was the lag, you reckon, to move that to a...
Let me see if I've got when they actually moved down there to...
But, I mean, I was thinking cotton gins by 1830 was using steam engines and got them off the river.
And that may have been... I may be quoting myself wrong. It may be a little earlier than that. I'd have to look back on the history of Arcadia. It may be the late 1830s, but they moved all those mills in pretty much the same time frame. Interesting thing, Canal Street. We got a Canal Street. We don't have a canal, and I've always wondered, what was that? Well, before they built that railroad, they chartered a canal. They actually sold stock in a canal. And the canal was going to run from the mill at Arcadia on the north side of Pond Creek and would have come out south of Milton. Canal Street was platted to go to that canal. The economy turned south. There was a depression in the early 1830s, and that company went out. When the depression ended, they changed it to a railroad company and put in that mule-drawn railroad on the south side of Pond Creek, and so the canal never happened. But Canal Street's there nonetheless. It goes from Berry Hill Street, which at the time would have been the Main Street area, down to where the canal would have come through town. Yes, ma'am?
Since you are in the fire department, perhaps you would know, and I don't know how it occurred, I'm not sure of the date, but it was in either the late 40s or very early 50s, that one of those bridges on Highway 90 going to Pensacola burned. And I don't know why it was so interesting, but I went with my family out there to watch this, and there's pictures taken of it. But I never knew how the fire started. Do you know of anything?
No, I haven't run across that one. But the problem I find trying to chase this stuff down, you can find it in the newspaper, but you kind of got to know that it occurred in pretty close area when, because a lot of people don't remember all these things. I'm still finding things that I haven't been able to document and find any specific record of. There's a pure oil bulk plant fire that I cover in my book that occurred in the 60s, which was right there off of Caroline Street in Milton, and was a huge event. Well, Rufus Hayes had a Texaco station a couple blocks away. It burned sometime a little before that, but I can't find anything on it.
Wow.
And I can't find anybody can pinpoint the date. And if you've ever gone over, tried to go through the microfilms and do the research in the newspapers, that's about a mind-numbing thing to try and go through and read all those little newspapers.